When the pilot stepped out of the rescue helicopter and removed her helmet, the rescued soldiers froze. The person who had saved them wasn't just a woman, but a woman with a prosthetic leg. As millions watched these images on television, tears filled their eyes. What city are you watching from today? If you believe that stories of real heroes need to be told, don't forget to subscribe to support the channel. Her name was Captain Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, with shoulder-length auburn hair always tied back in regulation style, green eyes sharp as a hawk spotting its target. But her story was different from others, because her left leg, from the knee down, was prosthetic. 6:30 a.m., Army Base, Kentucky. Sarah arrived early as always, conducting final checks on her Black Hawk helicopter. Maintenance Chief Rodriguez shook his head while muttering, "Early again, Mitchell. Don't you ever rest?" Sarah smiled back. "No time for rest, Chief. In this job, 1 second late means lives lost." Suddenly, the emergency alarm pierced the morning air. The operations center crackled over the intercom. "All flight personnel report to operations immediately. Emergency situation." In the operations center, Colonel Marcus Webb stood before a tactical map, his face grim. Sarah and 7 other pilots lined up, waiting to hear what he had to say. "Gentlemen and lady," the colonel said, glancing at Sarah, "a 12-man Special Forces team has been ambushed in the Kandahar Mountains. We have wounded. Weather conditions are terrible, zero visibility with snow and ice storms. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't send anyone, but..." He pointed to a location on the map. "This position is at 10,500 feet elevation, surrounded by 60-foot cliffs. The landing zone is barely 30 feet wide. One mistake, and it's a 500-foot drop." Captain Torres, a seasoned pilot with 15 years' experience, stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, that's a suicide mission. No helicopter can land safely in those conditions." Colonel Webb's jaw tightened. "That team has been pinned down for 18 hours. They have 3 critically wounded soldiers who won't survive another night. Satellite shows enemy movement closing in on their position." Sarah studied the tactical display. The terrain was brutal, jagged peaks, narrow valleys, whether that could down an aircraft in seconds. But somewhere in those mountains, 12 soldiers were fighting for their lives. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "I volunteer for the mission." The room fell silent. Captain Torres turned to stare at her. "Mitchell, that terrain will require split-second pedal work. You can't maintain precise control with a prosthetic in those conditions." Sarah's eyes never left the map. "I've been flying with this leg for 8 years, Torres. I know exactly what I can and can't do." Colonel Webb hesitated. "Sarah, I appreciate your courage, but Torres has a point. The insurance liability alone." "Colonel," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady but firm, "those soldiers don't care about insurance liability. They care about getting home to their families." What none of them knew was Sarah's secret. For the past 3 years, she had been conducting unauthorized training flights in the Colorado Rockies, practicing precision landings in impossible terrain. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because she knew a day like this would come. The accident that took her leg happened 8 years ago, during her second deployment in Afghanistan. An IED explosion destroyed her convoy vehicle. While her team was trapped in the wreckage, enemy fire pinned them down. Sarah, despite her shattered leg, managed to coordinate their extraction over radio for 4 hours until rescue arrived. During her recovery, military doctors told her she'd never fly again. "The prosthetic won't give you the sensitivity needed for combat piloting," they said. "Find a desk job." But Sarah had made a promise to herself and to the memories of the 3 soldiers who didn't make it out of that convoy. She would never let wounded soldiers die waiting for help that was deemed too dangerous to attempt. So she learned, she adapted, she practiced until the prosthetic became an extension of her, well, rather than a limitation of her body. Colonel Webb finally nodded. "Mitchell, you're cleared for the mission, but I want real-time telemetry on everything. First sign of trouble, you abort." "Understood, sir." As Sarah walked toward her helicopter, she could hear whispers from the other pilots. She's going to get herself killed. That leg can't handle mountain thermals. Someone should stop this before it becomes a disaster. Sarah had heard it all before. 8 years of doubts. 8 years of proving herself over and over again. But today wasn't about proving anything to anyone. Today was about 12 soldiers who needed to come home. The Black Hawk lifted off into the gray morning sky. Weather reports crackled over the radio. Wind gusts up to 45 knots, visibility less than 50 meters, temperature dropping to minus 15 degrees. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, her prosthetic leg automatically adjusting pressure on the anti-torque pedals. She had programmed the leg sensors to respond to her neural impulses, creating a feedback system that most people couldn't distinguish from a natural limb. 2 hours into the flight, she was deep in the mountains. The terrain below was a maze of peaks and valleys, all shrouded in swirling snow and fog. Her GPS showed she was approaching the target zone, but visibility was nearly zero. Rescue 1 to Ground Team Alpha. She called over the radio. I'm approaching your position. Can you mark your location? Static filled the channel for several seconds before a weak voice responded. Rescue 1, this is Sergeant Davis, Alpha Team. We're on a narrow ledge about 200 meters up the north face. 3 of our guys are in bad shape. We've got enemy movement in the valley below. Sarah switched to thermal imaging, searching for heat signatures in the snow. There, 12 figures huddled together on what looked like a shelf of rock barely wide enough for a helicopter's landing skids. Alpha Team, I have visual on your position. Prepare for immediate extraction. Rescue 1. Sergeant Davis's voice was strained. The LZ is too small. Your rotor diameter won't clear the rock walls. Sarah studied the terrain display. He was right. The landing zone was impossibly tight. But she had trained for this exact scenario in Colorado, using canyon walls and narrow mountain passes. Alpha Team, trust me, I've done this before. What she didn't say was that she had never attempted it in a blizzard, with wounded soldiers and enemy forces nearby. Sarah began her descent, using the canyon walls as reference points. Her prosthetic leg worked in perfect harmony with her natural movements, making micro-adjustments to keep the helicopter stable in the turbulent mountain air. At 100 feet above the ledge, a sudden downdraft caught the aircraft. The Black Hawk dropped 30 feet in 2 seconds, its rotor blades coming within inches of the rock face. Pull up, came a panicked voice over the radio, probably one of the pilots back at base monitoring her telemetry. But Sarah held steady. She had anticipated the downdraft. Her training in Colorado had taught her to read the mountain air currents like a language. She made a slight adjustment with her prosthetic leg, compensating for the rotational torque, and continued her descent. At 50 feet, she could see the soldiers clearly through the snow. 3 were lying on stretchers improvised from equipment and jackets. The others were positioned defensively, watching for enemy movement. At 20 feet, her landing skids were aligned with the narrow ledge. There was less than 2 feet of clearance on either side of her rotor blades. At 10 feet, another gust of wind hit the helicopter. This time, it pushed her toward the rock wall. Sarah's prosthetic leg made a lightning-fast adjustment, increasing anti-torque pressure while her hands compensated on the cyclic and collective controls. The soldiers on the ledge watched in amazement as the helicopter seemed to dance in the air, making impossible adjustments to stay centered over their position. Finally, with a gentle touch that defied the harsh conditions, Sarah's skids made contact with the rocky ledge. "Load the wounded first," she called out over the rotor noise. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, loading their injured teammates into the helicopter's cabin. Sarah kept the aircraft perfectly stable, her prosthetic leg making constant micro-adjustments to compensate for the shifting weight and the mountain winds. As the last wounded soldier was secured, Sergeant Davis climbed into the co-pilot seat. Through the swirling snow, he could see Sarah's intense concentration as she managed the controls. "How are you holding us steady in this wind?" he shouted over the noise. Sarah didn't take her eyes off her instruments. 8 years of practice and a leg that doesn't get tired. That's when Davis noticed the prosthetic. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Take off in 10 seconds. Sarah announced. "Everyone hold on." The ascent was even more challenging than the landing. With the additional weight of 12 soldiers and their equipment, the Black Hawk was near its maximum load capacity. Sarah had to use every ounce of her skill to clear the canyon walls. As they climbed through the clouds, Davis stared at Sarah in amazement. "Ma'am, I've been flying with pilots for 15 years. I've never seen anyone handle an aircraft like that, especially in these conditions." Sarah's focus remained on her instruments. "The aircraft doesn't care if my leg is flesh or metal, Sergeant. It only cares if I can fly it safely." An hour later, they touched down at the forward medical base. As the wounded soldiers were rushed to the trauma unit, Sarah began her post-flight procedures with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the mission. It was only when she stepped out of the helicopter and removed her helmet that the full impact hit everyone watching. The soldiers she had rescued stood in stunned silence as they saw their pilot clearly for the first time. A woman with a prosthetic leg had just performed one of the most dangerous rescue missions in military aviation history. Word of the rescue spread quickly through the base, then to higher command, then to military news networks. Within hours, footage of Sarah's helicopter landing on that impossible mountain ledge was being broadcast around the world. The 3 wounded soldiers survived because of her precision flying. The entire team returned home because she refused to accept that some rescues were too dangerous to attempt. 6 months later, Sarah received the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the highest honors in military aviation. During the ceremony, she was asked to speak about her accomplishment. "I didn't do anything special," she said into the microphone, her voice steady and humble. "I just flew a helicopter to where soldiers needed help. The fact that I have a prosthetic leg doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me a pilot who had to learn to adapt." But her words didn't capture the full story. In the months following the rescue, military medical protocols were rewritten. Wounded veterans who had been medically retired were given new opportunities to serve. The assumption that physical disability meant inability was challenged and changed. Sarah continued flying rescue missions. Each one performed with the same quiet competence that had saved those 12 soldiers. She never sought media attention, never wrote a book about her experiences, never tried to capitalize on her fame. Today, Sarah Mitchell serves as Chief of Flight Operations at Fort Campbell. Her prosthetic leg has been upgraded twice, incorporating new technology that allows even greater precision in aircraft control. Young pilots often ask her about the secret to flying with prosthetic. Her answer is always the same. There is no secret. There's only practice, preparation, and a refusal to accept limitations that others want to place on you. On her office wall hangs a photo from that rescue mission. 12 soldiers standing together, alive and home with their families. No medals, no awards, no recognition could mean more to her than that single image. The lesson Sarah Mitchell taught wasn't about overcoming disability. It was about refusing to let others define what you're capable of achieving. Sometimes the most important battles aren't against enemies or obstacles. Sometimes they're against a voice that says, "You can't." And sometimes, when you refuse to listen to that voice, you don't just save yourself, you save everyone who comes after you. Sarah Mitchell didn't just fly a helicopter that day. She flew straight through the barriers that society places on what's possible. And in doing so, she reminded us all that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they look like a woman with a prosthetic leg who simply refuses to accept that some rescues are impossible. Have you ever met someone who redefined what you thought was possible? Share their story in the comments. And if you believe these stories of quiet heroism deserve to be heard, subscribe to support more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.